Hello, it's Randi Rhodes. Here's a clip from our show, and go to randirhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.
Mary had a little man.
The fall. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream today. Change has come to America.
Believe me.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind.
All right. So this is a brilliant idea. Did not come from me. It came from this man. His name is Tom Rogers. Tom Rogers is the founder of CNBC. He was also the CEO of TiVo. Everybody remember TiVo? Trump still uses it. Just saying. He refers to TiVo all the time. And anyway, so Tom Rogers is the guy that invented it. And Tom Rogers has put a lot of thought into the Constitution and the representation that tiny little red states get as opposed to giant blue states with 91 million people, okay? So the 10 smallest red states is about 91 million people. The 10 largest blue states is 24 times that. So you have these 10 little red states with 2 senators each, and you have these giant blue states with 2 senators each. And so you have a minority of the country in the majority in the Senate. And it's like, so 5% of the United States population gets their way over 95% of the U.S. population, because since the time of the founding, the population has changed, and the makeup of the United States, the actual United States, is different. We've added states, lots of states, since the founding. That's number one. Number two, back during the days of the founding, when the country was established, the difference between the populations of the 5 biggest northern states to the 5 smallest southern states was 766,381 people, not including slaves, with a 2-to-1 ratio between the two populations. 2-to-1. And now it's 24-to-1, with the red states having this over-representation. So Tom Rogers suggests that we add 2 more states. He suggests that we add D.C. as a state and we add Puerto Rico as a state. If we did that, we would have 4 more senators. See what I mean? Here's his idea.
And speaking of McConnell, the population of Kentucky is about 4 million people. The combined population of Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. is about 4 million people. Puerto Rico, in fact, has a higher population than 21 states in the country. And not only in terms of minority representation of blacks and Latinos, who are clearly underrepresented in the political process, the victims of voter suppression more than anybody else, the gerrymandering decision of the U.S. Supreme Court, obviously further compounding that issue. This would be an indirect remedy for a lot of that, not to mention the humanitarian issues of how Puerto Ricans were treated as second-class citizens, and making them a state would go a long way probably in rectifying that so it doesn't happen again in the future.
Well, I happen to think that's brilliant. Look, we add states all the time, okay? We added Alaska, we added Hawaii. Before that, we added Arizona, we added New Mexico. It's so interesting that the population in Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico is 4 million people. And they're all being deprived of representation in Congress, and the population of Kentucky is 4 million people, and they have the majority leader who is stopping all progress, including Obama's pick for the Supreme Court. And what does it take to add a state? Well, it's just a majority vote of Congress and, a plebiscite of the majority of the territory citizens. So D.C. would have to vote and Puerto Rico would have to vote. And D.C. and Puerto Rico have already voted several times on this. So it would help deal with the, lack of minority black and Latino representation in Congress, but it would also help to overcome the voter repression of minority interests in the states. I think that this is now, of course, we'd have to win the House and the Senate and the presidency in order to, well, not so much the presidency, but we would have to win 2020 in order to do this. Because we would need a majority vote in Congress, and that would take 4 more senators than we have now. But it's a brilliant freaking idea. I mean, he talks about, the possibility of 4 new senators. It's fabulous.
This is simply a way of doing something that we do every 50 or 60 years. 60 years ago, we admitted Hawaii and Alaska. They had about 1/5 the combined population of Puerto Rico and D.C. today. 50 years before that, we admitted New Mexico and Arizona. So every 50, 60 years, we do this. It's about time, and we need to do it given how out of whack Senate control has become in the small hands of a very tiny percentage of U.S. voters.
That's so good. That's so good. So think about it. Alaska and Hawaii are admitted, right? And they have 1/5 of the population of Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. And yet they have no representation whatsoever, like none. Does that seem right to you? Because it doesn't seem right to me. And of course, there are humanitarian reasons for statehood in light of the inadequate federal response to Puerto Rico and the fact that, Puerto Rico can't vote for, various things. This is just so wrong. I can't even tell you. But what a centrist balance that would bring to our democracy. What a beautiful thing. It would reflect the wide diversity of U.S. populations that immediately would change the balance of power. Now, what does Mitch McConnell think of it? Well, they asked him about it. This is old, okay? This isn't like a new idea. But Mitch McConnell, I guess it was a week ago or something, he said granting statehood to D.C. and Puerto Rico is socialism. How is representative democracy, which the founding fathers crafted in the Constitution, and since we're talking all about the census and stuff and counting people and giving them the adequate representation they deserve so that we could enforce the Voting Rights Act, which even the lawyers, when they represented the case to the Supreme Court, said was not true. Okay. Mitch McConnell is saying representative democracy that actually encompasses the actual makeup of the United States of America and all of its citizens, all of them, would be socialism.
You may have mentioned this on your show, but they plan to make the District of Columbia state. They'd give them 2 new Democratic senators.
Yes.
Puerto Rico state would give them 2 more new Democratic senators.
Yes. And
as a former Supreme Court clerk yourself, you've surely noticed that they plan to expand the Supreme Court. So this is full bore socialism on the march in the House. And yeah, as long as I'm the majority leader of the Senate, none of that stuff is going anywhere.
Well, you won't be the majority leader if we add 4 Democratic senators, will you? No, you won't. You'll just be some, distant memory. Merrick Garland's Bad Dreams. Do you know? And that's where it should be. That's what it. So we need a 2-branch sweep. In 2020, what we need the House, obviously, to stay in Democratic hands. We need to add 4 senators. We need to add 4. So it takes 2 houses of Congress and 2 branches of government to admit 2 new states. It's doable. It's something that when you're voting, especially, and I'll bring it up, believe me, I will, after we have our nominee and people are like very disappointed because this one or that one or the one that you were supporting from the beginning is not the nominee, or the one that you thought was, your first choice is not now the nominee. Whatever, I am going to remind you that if we ever ever are going to get to a balance in this country where 5% of the population has as much representation as the other 95%, which is wrong on every level, where there is no minority representation for this whole country in the entire U.S. Senate, except for, like Tim Scott, the Republican from South Carolina. Please give me a break. I mean, if we're ever going to return to some sort of a balance, a centrist balance in this country, we have got to admit D.C. and Puerto Rico as states and introduce 4 new senators to this mess. Now, I don't know about the court packing thing that he decided to throw in there, too. I don't think many Democrats are for court packing. But I do think it matters who sits on the Supreme Court, and that's another reason why the Democrats have got to have the Senate. Got to. So in 2020, there's a lot on the ballot that may not just be apparent, but the idea of expanding representation to people of color, to Puerto Rico, to DC, that's doable. And it's brilliant, and I love this idea. I'm all about it. Mitch McConnell, we have got to put that man in the dustbin of history. Go to RandiRhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.